Without any further ado, welcome to the Dean's Forum at Johns Hopkins University, SAIS. I'm Kent Calder, Senior Advisor to Dean Jim Steinberg, and previously Interim Dean. Our distinguished speaker for today, a Jamaican Ambassador to the United States and Permanent Representative to the Organization of American States, and Audrey Marks, is no stranger to Washington. She served twice as Jamaican ambassador here, the only diplomat to do so, and is the only woman in Jamaican history to have served in that post. During part of her first posting as ambassador during the Obama years, our Dean Jim Steinberg was also serving as Deputy Secretary of State. Jim later, as we know, served as dean both at the University of Texas and also Syracuse University before coming to SAIS, and will engage in dialogue with Ambassador Marks today. Ambassador Marks has had a remarkable career, not only Jamaica's first female ambassador to the United States and the first ambassador to be assigned here twice, but also a practiced entrepreneur and the first female president of the American Chamber of Commerce of Jamaica. She started and actually operated 6 previous businesses, including, and I believe there may be more, an online bill payment system, a transportation company, a real estate sales and development firm, and a banana exporting enterprise. She also served as chair of the Tourism Product Development Company and director of a major Jamaican securities firm. Jamaican Americans, as most of us know, have contributed greatly, especially in recent years, to American national life. 90,000 of them participated in the building of the Panama Canal over a century ago. Many contributed significantly, as many of us know, to our civil rights dialogue, especially in its early years. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell is an honored name that even now we mourn. Susan Rice, who followed in his footsteps, and Vice President Kamala Harris continue to serve. Here at SAIS, our valued colleague Corey Baker, Assistant Dean for Student Affairs, is a Jamaican American and is with us here today. Overall, as is perhaps less known, around 10% of African Americans in the United States today are either immigrants or the children of immigrants. And a large share of those immigrants are from the Caribbean, with Jamaicans being among the largest groups. Jamaicans have thus contributed much to our national story. The economic and security relations with this important neighbor, whose embassy is only steps away on the far side of DuPont Circle, matter greatly. And it gives me great pleasure, personally, to introduce Jamaica's highest representative here in the United States, Her Excellency Audrey Marks. Ambassador Marks, it's a real pleasure and an honor to welcome you here. Welcome to SAIS.
Well, thank you, Dean Calder, for those terrific remarks, and welcome, Ambassador. It's a great pleasure to have you here. As Dean Calder mentioned, my last diplomatic post here as Deputy Secretary was your first time as Ambassador, but I'm glad to see that you're carrying on and back with us. It's a great asset for all of us, and so thank you for taking the time to be here, and thanks for all of those who are participating virtually for taking the time to join us today. As Kent mentioned, you've traveled an unusual route to becoming ambassador. You don't come from kind of a long-standing diplomatic career or from the Foreign Service. And I know both our students and others would like to hear a little bit more about how it came about that you made this transition from the private sector to diplomacy, and how have you found both the similarities and the differences between your life in the private sector and now in government service.
Thank you very much, Dean Steinberg, and thank you for that warm and kind introduction, Dean Calder. Thank you to the team here from SAIS, Mr. Corey Baker, I acknowledge you, the Jamaican American here, and of course my team members who are with me, giving me usual great support. It's really my pleasure to be here and to share with you all. So the question is, how did I make this transition, and what are the similarities that may be found in these two occupations? I speak with my colleagues all the time that I'm a diplomat in making, in the making still, because, you know, as a business person, normally you speak what you think first, and deal with the consequences. As a diplomat, I always have to give a second thought and sometimes a third thought before I speak. So it has been a learning curve in that respect. But I will tell you, as a business person, the art of being a successful business person is knowing how to negotiate for the bottom line that you want to see. There's a little anecdote that the difference between an entrepreneur and the person that will be locked away as being not mentally capable is that the entrepreneur is able to convince persons to see the vision that they have. If you're not able to see that vision, convince others to see what they can't see, they might, you know, lock you away. But the art of being able to do that, I believe, is to find common ground and to build consensus and to negotiate to a win-win solution. That's a key in business, and that's a key in diplomacy. So in the end, it was very interesting to me that so many of my experiences as primarily an entrepreneur, and in many cases, creating very new business types came to bear in this transition. Because I came at a difficult time in Jamaica's history with the United States. We were having an issue regarding an alleged drug lord and the extradition process. And what was asked for at that point was someone to negotiate a way that we could both come to a common conclusion in terms of how to handle this process. And I think the Prime Minister at the time thought I may be the best person based on my business experience, having been at that time the president of the American Chamber of Commerce, and also, I suppose, having good relations here in the United States. So that's the period or the thought behind that transition. But the emphasis I want to make is that the experience in business was very useful in starting a role in diplomacy, seeing the common interest or seeking common interest.
That's a fascinating story. And I think a lot we can all learn in terms of preparing our diplomats for these kinds of roles. So I obviously want to talk to you a little bit about U.S.-Jamaican relations. It's of great interest to all of us here, and recognizing how multidimensional they are. So there's lots for us to talk about. But I wonder if we could begin by something that's happened just recently, this meeting that you hosted, this bilateral meeting between U.S. senior officials and Jamaican senior officials on IT and cybersecurity and the like. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, what your hopes and expectations were for those meetings, and how they turned out.
Okay, it's my pleasure to speak about good things, and that was a good meeting and a good visit. And it you know, we touched on just a while ago the nexus between business and diplomacy, and preparing our diplomats for this new world. And Jamaica has started to really focus on what is now known as economic diplomacy. So beyond just looking at how we can extend friendly bilateral relationships. The emphasis is how can we make whatever are our advantages work for each other. Jamaica is a small country, but we are well situated strategically in the Caribbean at a point between North America and South America. We are known to be industrious, hardworking people. We have a high level of internet penetration. And of course, the US is the world leader, the most industrialized country in the world. And we are neighbors. We're just from Washington is 2.5 to 3 hours to Montego Bay. And then there are direct flights, by the way. So especially in January and February, I want you to remember that as 3 hours and you're in Montego Bay. And it's always between 75 and 85 degrees. So the focus is especially coming out of COVID or preparing to come out of this pandemic. Because we are going to have to learn to live with this pandemic for a while, and we can't continue shutting down. So the key is to find areas that we can move into easily. And one thing that we have seen from this pandemic, as we are seeing now with this event, is that we are becoming we are forced to accept being a digital society and learn to do things electronically as a norm. And so what we have found interestingly, because at the OAS, I'm currently the chairman of the secretariat that deals with integral development. And we are amazed at the statistics that are showing that there's such a acceleration in businesses that are internet-based, that are in the virtual world, and the acceptance from preschoolers all the way now to the older generation that previously had a little resistance. There's now a much wider acceptance that we have to embrace online business, the Internet of Things, the virtual world as a part of our lives. So it was very opportune for us to reach a point in our discussions in our bilateral relations that we could expose our ministers who drive policy in Jamaica, similar to your cabinet secretaries here, to what was happening in the advances being made here in the United States, and these advances that are being facilitated by the 5G technology. So the group started by visiting the Arizona State University. I'm not sure why it wasn't Johns Hopkins, but I'll find out about that next time. And they, the truth is they were all blown away just by the presentations. There's one particular, almost like a situation room, where you can now see for any particular decision that you're going to make, you can put in that decision and you can see various scenarios that will come from that decision in terms of how we are now able to do exponential outcomes by AI. So artificial intelligence is now also making it almost revolutionary in terms of decision making in business, in government, in communities, in civil society. And the Arizona State University has really perfected a methodology of being able to show that to decision makers as to how we can have more effective decision making using technology. So that was of course, a wide-ranging visit looking at various technologies, but that was the highlight. And here in the US, they got exposed to cybersecurity trends and the latest advances, looking at various other AI advances, telecommunications advances, and signing off on a cooperation with how we use 5G technology going forward. So overall, it was a very successful trip and one that will benefit Jamaica in decades to come, because already a team from the ASU have now visited Jamaica to continue the project going forward. And the Deputy Assistant Secretary is going down next week to also continue. So it's a very focused project that we're working on to ensure that something tangible will come out of this visit. So
That's terrific. And obviously, it's a leading edge. And we here at SAIS are doing a lot of work on cybersecurity as well. So we hope that we can host some of your folks on future visits and also beyond SAIS within the wider Johns Hopkins community. So there are a lot of opportunities here. And we'll look forward on their next visit to see if we
look
can
forward.
be part of that agenda. How did it come about? Can you tell us a little bit about
In
how
fact,
this?
team, please make sure that we. So it came about because the Prime Minister has been looking at ways that we can have more use technology. His vision is to have Jamaica become one of the first countries to be seen as a digital society. We know about Estonia and the advances they have made as a small country. So we are encouraged that size is not going to be a limit for us to become a society that is fully literate with the use of technology and transform how we do business. You know, I remember back in 1995, I started a company called Paymaster in Jamaica. And that was the first online bill payment company. And the thinking was, I had actually gone to Florida and saw Ticketmaster accepting bill payments. And they were in the Sears store. This is how long ago, in the mall. And they were accepting bill payments from everyone coming in. I'm saying, I used to work at a telephone company, and I know persons have to travel 20 miles, 30 miles to pay a bill. I thought that was amazing technology, and I wanted I wanted to see that established in Jamaica. So I started a due diligence to see how that was possible, but the technology wasn't there. That terminal was actually a terminal from the Southern Bell Company, the telephone company, had actually put their terminal in that little kiosk. But my thinking was that if they can do that, that started an idea that we can facilitate using technology to have persons pay their bills outside of a utility store. And that has started the whole concept of Paymaster. And 2 years later, because the internet was just becoming commercial, I was able to start that business where persons could pay any bill, over 100 different types of bills in their nearest supermarket or gas station or post office. So I'm a firm believer, and that transformed lives. We started a process of using technology to make things operate more efficiently. And I'm a firm believer that that was just a little bit of what we can do in encouraging efficiency of business when we start embracing the wider use of technology.
You know, I think most of our listeners and the wider audience, so there's been a lot of debate about the development of 5G technology and how that's going to roll out. And I know there's been some discussion, at least between Jamaica and the previous administration, about the issue that's been on everybody's mind about the potential of Chinese technology and Huawei. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about where that stands and sort of how Jamaica is thinking about that issue, which has gotten so much attention here in the United States.
So there are two aspects to that. You have the geopolitical issue in terms of the race between China and the US in terms of who will provide a better technology in 5G. And we tend not to get too involved in that discussion. We sit on the sideline and see how it will play out. But in terms of 5G technology, there are two sides to that, to looking at that. There is a concern in terms of the health implications. This is much more, I guess, what is it called? Radioactive activity coming from this increased technology. And I think we are hearing more and more, and I'm sure that is being explored. So that there's that argument. We have not seen anything conclusive so far in terms of how it is more detrimental to your health than 3G or 4G. So, we are moving along that path. In terms of just the sheer technology of 5G, that's more what we're interested in, because it facilitates so much more speed and access and efficiency in how we transmit information and provide a framework for a digital society. So we are very interested in the suppliers of the best technology, and we will work with those suppliers, and we hope that it will be a neighboring country. So that's the general focus.
Madam Ambassador, you're very skilled in the arts of diplomacy. You may have come from the private sector, but you've mastered the forums. That was very nicely put. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you so much.
So you mentioned health, and so of course that's the other great preoccupation these days, which is COVID. And I'd like to have you share with us a little bit about the perspective of Jamaica on this. I noticed I was doing my own little research before that at least recently the number of cases seem to be down in Jamaica. So congratulations to you and the government and the people of Jamaica on that, and that you've begun a very dramatic rollout of your vaccination campaign.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience there. I know you were one of the first, maybe the first country in the Caribbean to benefit from the COVAX facility.
Yes.
So we'd like to hear a little bit about that as well, and sort of what your challenges have been in both securing vaccines and dealing with the challenge of COVID in Jamaica.
Sure. It's clearly a difficult topic still. And I always kind of take a pause to just express condolences to persons who have suffered loss during this time. Jamaica took a very proactive position on the issue of addressing the pandemic. And so from very early, we went into total shutdown. In fact, it was a time of tremendous stress and trauma for us here in the diplomatic corps, because we actually had initially over 7,000 Jamaicans stranded here in the US and around the world trying to get back to Jamaica, when we just had to immediately close our borders because we wanted to ensure that we could prepare properly for what was coming. And so we at the embassies and the consulates had to really put an infrastructure in place quickly in terms of a network where persons could call, we could provide accommodation for persons who were kind of just left stranded, food, medical support. It was, we had to set up our entire infrastructure. But that was to facilitate the government being able to keep the country secure for a while. And that paid off. For the first 6 months of the COVID pandemic, Jamaica had very low rates. We opened back the country in a pretty smart way, implementing tests for COVID as procedures coming in, and really encouraged the protocols in terms of mask wearing, washing hands, social distancing. And we are fortunate that the private sector also came on board very strongly in terms of really pushing their staff and customers to join in and accepting that this is a serious problem and we all need a road through. So for quite a while, we were handling it pretty well. And maybe that's, the human tendency, we did relax a bit towards the end of last year, early this year. And then the Delta variant came about and we had a spike. And that hit us very hard. We saw death rates going up. But fortunately, just around that time, we had started from April to try and do the push for vaccine, because again, the government of Jamaica, led by the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, our Prime Minister, he firmly believed in the power of vaccine to help us through this period. And so we were aggressively working with COVAX and all the other partners to put in our interest to get vaccines early. And we rolled out a very aggressive campaign. We then, the US, by late April, announced that they were doing some vaccine, I'll call it vaccine diplomacy, in terms of engaging with Canada and Mexico to start with some vaccine exchanges. And we immediately jumped on board saying, me too, and got very involved in a campaign to push for the administration to look at their neighbors and supply vaccines. And President Biden came out with a pretty powerful pledge of over $1 billion of vaccine support to developing countries and globally to give support and to open up the vaccine access. And we were very fortunate to receive an early pledge for 600,000 doses of Pfizer vaccine. And we have gotten 400,000 so far. So that has been, and we went and we bought nearly 2 million of the Johnson & Johnson. We also got AstraZeneca vaccines through various donations and also through purchase. What we found is that Jamaicans, there is now more and more vaccine hesitancy among members of the population. But the Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, the entire government is now on a campaign, because we believe it's more a lack of understanding. And of course, we're now all exposed to the internet. There's so much other views out there about vaccines and the possibility of somebody wanting to put a microchip in your so it is, that sort of discussion we had to really have a reasonable discussion with persons to say, think about it and look at what is happening around you from persons who are vaccinated versus those who are not. And so we have seen the numbers go up. We have done over 1 million doses of vaccine so far, and we are continuing to make the push. Interestingly, Pfizer is the most popular vaccine that is in demand in Jamaica now. We are very fortunate to be able to be accessing it. So we are very aggressive, and we have opened back the country totally. And the official policy position is that we are going to have to learn to live with this pandemic, because we have to balance lives and livelihood, and we all have a role to play. And we just need, at this point, the only way that we know that we can protect ourselves to some degree is to get vaccinated, and otherwise continue wearing our mask.
And are you on track to get the vaccines, the quantities of the vaccine that you need, or how is that going?
Yes, so that is what I was saying earlier, that we have gotten the vaccines that we need. Now we had a long wait. We started getting them about April, and then since then we have had a steady supply. And the ones that came in, the latest were the Pfizer vaccine, and now we have gotten a second tranche from the United States last month. So we now have over 400,000 delivered, and we're expecting another tranche mid-month, another 200,000. So the supply is now meeting the demand, and we're in a good place. You know, our big challenge now is to get everyone to get vaccinated. And we have started also to give our children. So we are opening back schools because quite a large number of our school children are now getting vaccinated.
You mentioned the economic impacts, and I'd be interested just to hear a little bit more about how you've been trying to cope with that, and given the difficulties in global supply chains and the like, how does that impact Jamaica, and what strategies are you trying to pursue to deal with that?
Right. So we opened back the country last year, June. So July. So we really did not stay locked down for very long. Once we saw that the protocols could be implemented at the airports and in the hotel sector to keep persons safe. So we started back, we opened back the economy in terms of the tourism sector. When we had a spike, we left the tourism sector open with those protocols in place, and we had to lock down most of the rest of the country to manage the spike. But we have now opened back, are opening back, and just about fully there since September. We have been fortunate in that, I guess, all around the world, so many persons have gone into being locked down and in, just in their homes, that once the world started opening up back a bit and Jamaica was declared as open for visitors, we have gotten over 1 million visitors who have come to Jamaica. And we have what is called the resort areas, and we have very supportive protocols for visitors coming in to keep them safe and to ensure that we also keep our people safe. So we're fully open for business. In terms of the general supply chain, we have been fortunate so far. We have gone through, every now and then we have had issues of shortages, like with supplies of oxygen and those sorts of things. But we have been able to call on global partners all over, and have been able to resolve those supply issues. So we are actually managing pretty well right now.
Excellent.
Yes.
Congratulations for that. And I know that as a destination, it's hard to beat. So.
Yeah, thank you.
So let me just remind those of you who are on the Zoom here that we'd love to have your questions and answers. You could just post them up for us, and we'll try to get them to Ambassador Marks in due course. Yeah. If I could switch a little bit to the other great topic of the last month or so, which is climate change.
Yes.
We just had the conclusion of COP26. Obviously, Jamaica is both a country which can be very much affected by various aspects of the global warming problem, but also a country that's done a lot in the world of energy and energy resilience. So I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your perspective and your government's perspective on the climate change challenge, how you assess COP26 and what you think the priorities should be on the agenda going forward.
Sure. So we clearly, as an island, we have skin in the game. We hear all the forecasts that, island countries, island states could disappear if we don't do something about what is happening and the trend that is where it's going. So we are very invested, and our Prime Minister has been leading the charge at the UN in terms of trying to push on this agenda. So we were pleased earlier this year when President Biden convened an early climate management summit and start the whole preparations to COP26. So we are, Jamaica, we actually have set a pretty aggressive goal to go with 50% renewables by 2030. So we are aggressively not only asking countries to do something about, but fully participating ourselves towards a goal that we believe will make a difference in the world. We are also one of the first countries to ban plastic bags from the supermarkets and everywhere, and replace them with paper bags. And so these are just like one of the big immediate examples, but we have totally embraced the urgency of now with managing what is happening with our climate change crisis. And so we had a full contingent going to COP26, led by the Prime Minister. And we had very fruitful discussions and were able to engage with all our major partners, including the United States, and to push our agenda. I know we have seen some conversations about a disappointment with COP26. It's early days. Many countries are still evaluating how they can transition from, quickly from fossil fuel-based economy to a more renewable economy. There was a time when it was felt that it was far more expensive to do. It's becoming more and more, it's been seen more and more that it's possible and possible for it to be done efficiently. So I believe that there are enough assurances of interest and of support from the leaders of at COP26 to give us a place where we can continue pushing towards action, and I think President Biden's embrace of these more aggressive targets for coming out of COP26 was very encouraging. And we look to the United States to continue to lead on this, but Jamaica is fully invested as a participant.
Terrific.
Yes.
You talked a little bit before about some of the elements of regional cooperation. And I know that you're double-hatted here, I believe. You're not only the representative to our government, but also to the OAS.
Yes.
And so I'd be interested, there was a time, certainly in my day, when there was a lot of focus and attention. We had the Summit of Americas back in previous administrations. Maybe not close enough to know, but it seems to me that some of that regional energy may not be at the same level today. So I'm wondering how Jamaica thinks about that. What are the possibilities for either regional or sub-regional cooperation? What are the mechanisms? What would you like to see happen on that dimension?
Yes. The Organization of American States, the OAS, is our hemispheric organization. We have the UN, but this is our hemispheric. And so 34 of the 35 countries of the Western Hemisphere are currently members. Cuba withdrew a couple of years ago, and there's still the hope that there'll be a re-engagement with Cuba in the near future. Going to the OAS, the thing that I would really want to share with you is that, before looking at the broader picture, it made me realize just how fragile and valuable democracy really is. We take it for granted. And Jamaica's gone through its struggles to come to this place where we are now fully a democratic society. Back in 1980, we had nearly a civil war in terms of we were caught in the midst of the Cold War between going the Cuban way with Russia, going the US way, and it had a drastic impact on our country. Many persons died in that whole battle over the philosophy of where we would go eventually. We came through that, and over the years, we continued to invest in a system of transparent and democratic elections. And in 2016, Jamaica had an election which was won by one seat. Here you'd call it one district, yes, or for the presidential election, one college, electoral votes, yes, just by one seat. And in the past, without a strong democratic system of communication and trust from the people, that would have been a recipe for disaster. Instead, what we saw was that in 2 days, we were able to have a peaceful transition of government with the outgoing prime minister handing over to the incoming prime minister in a very efficient, cordial, and peaceful way. And that was a big turning point. I just wanted to share it because coming to the OAS, I see where there's still such a struggle for democracy in so many of the countries in the region, in Latin America. Right now, we see what is happening in Venezuela, and you have the impact of over, I think it's now nearly 4 million people as refugees, and that's the humanitarian crisis that, you know, not having an electoral process that works and that is trusted, what it can do to a country that probably has the most resources in the world. And most people are now starving because there's not a system of democracy that is trusted. We see what's going on now with Nicaragua, and so the OAS, we are now trying to have a dialogue that could keep Nicaragua in the body of the OAS, but they have indicated that they would wish to withdraw from the membership. And so when the question of democracy becomes a turning point, sometimes our members, Venezuela, the Maduro government has indicated that they have withdrawn from the OAS. So the OAS is a body that maintains a strong belief in democracy, human rights, human development, you know, justice in the region. And when those are challenged, sometimes members will want to leave. And our job as member states is to try as much as possible to keep all the members of the member states in the hemisphere connected and being part of the organization and keeping to the rules and agreements that we have made to pursue especially democracy and human rights in the hemisphere. Very, very important role.
Maybe I could just follow up on that because it's of special interest, at least to me, for my own involvement. But maybe you could say more about the situation in Haiti and what the regional parties might be able to do in dealing with that challenge to democracy that's taking place there.
So it seems as if you have been sitting in the OAS meetings. But it's interesting that you have continued to have your fingers on the pulse of the hot button issues, and certainly Haiti remains a major area of focus at the OAS. Fortunately, it is one where the government is cooperating. You know, we just went through the tragedy of the assassination of the former president, and the country is still in a turmoil. Also having gone through quite a few more natural disasters, and now with the resurgence of gangs and kidnappings and everything. So Haiti is now working with all the regional partners and at the OAS and in the United States to look at how they can really strengthen their institutions, especially in the area of security, and put a system in place to allow them to have a free and fair election at the earliest time so that people can get back into seeing a system that they can have trust in. As I said before, it's so important to have a system that people can trust is working. And so we are now all encouraging Haiti to, with its little resources, to put the focus on getting an early election in place, while we also try and assist with some of the more urgent needs of dealing with the pandemic, the security issues, recovering from the last hurricane and earthquake. So it is it's a very difficult situation, but we are all at the OAS committed to working with the leadership of Haiti to come to a resolution. And I know the United States is also very committed. So I think right now we are just all committed, and we believe that there will be a positive outcome.
People of Haiti have been through a lot in recent decades.
Yes.
Just coming back to the United States for a minute, as we mentioned, and Dean Calder mentioned at the outset, we're very honored to have so many people of Jamaican descent and Jamaican Americans here in the country. And I know that one of the responsibilities of an ambassador, and one of the pleasures, I think, of being an ambassador is to work with the diaspora community.
Very much
And so maybe
so.
you could tell us a little bit about your work there and your engagement with Jamaican Americans.
Sure, sure. So, Corey, again, a pleasure to see you right here. And a new person, because we haven't met and we are both here in Washington. And I used to pride myself on knowing everyone who is Jamaican American here in Washington. So I have a lot more work to do. Team, we have work to do. This is next door. So it's we are, Jamaica is interesting. We are very migrant people. And so we have, or I should say nomadic people, because we have from Panama Canal, as mentioned earlier, we have had waves of migration to the United States back in the 1920s, from the time with the Panama Canal, and then we had another wave in the 1960s when, usually in the 1940s, usually during the World War I and II, when the U.S. is looking for additional labor, Jamaicans came. When you're looking for teachers and nurses and professionals, Jamaicans came, because many Jamaicans attend school right here, primarily in the early days of at Howard University, and now right around the DMV area, we have hundreds of Jamaican students. Some will return and some will stay, and we try to encourage as many because we have experienced tremendous brain drain. We have seen where 40,000 Jamaicans have migrated, are migrating just about every year. So and many of them are tertiary educated. So we try and push for Jamaicans also to have some return migration home. So what we have now is a situation where there are almost 3 million Jamaicans in Jamaica, and just about the same over here. So you all could come back and take over the country. But we place a lot of emphasis on building a network of communications with our diaspora. And we're fortunate in that the Jamaican diaspora, some have remained very committed to Jamaica. So there are many diaspora groups, and they formed in areas of support in health, in education, in agriculture. So they are a big part of our investment, persons who return to invest and to continue being involved in the country. We have, again, even during this time when economies were contracting and people were losing jobs, remittances globally, I think, or is it in the region, Emil, went up by about $126 billion. And Jamaica, remittances as money transfers from diaspora members also increased to over $2 billion. So it has been a mainstay of helping us through this time, just supporting family and friends home. So for that and many other reasons, including the intellectual capital, because many of our Jamaicans over here are well educated. We make sure we have outreach and we engage with our diaspora. So now every month we are starting an initiative at the embassy called Let's Connect with Ambassador Marks, where earlier this year, as you probably all have seen, right now there's a constant battle between disseminating real information and everything else that is out there. So earlier this year, I realized that we were having quite a bit of misinformation going around. So we now have, apart from all the other communication modalities that we have tried, we now have every month a Zoom event where from everywhere in the diaspora, persons can log on, and we have for 2 hours a conversation. And you can ask me as the ambassador any question. And I've also given updates as to what is happening in Jamaica, and then I answer questions. And it doesn't matter who you are, you can ask any question, you can speak to the ambassador. And sometimes we have our ministers of government and also some experts from the United States. So we have opened that as another opportunity, another forum to connect with persons in the diaspora here, and to ensure that there is an openness of communication. But we are very proud of the Jamaican American, the Jamaicans in the diaspora, and here in the United States, Jamaican Americans. You mentioned earlier, Dean Calder, are so many who have done well, and there are many more whose names we don't hear as much, but they are, you know, bedrock in the society in the fields of science and technology, and all the other important areas. So we are proud of our diaspora. We try to keep very close. I noticed that we don't have as many doing in the areas that we are really known for global, like in sports and in music, but we are pleased that they're in academia and business and science and technology and all the other important areas. But we compete with Americans aggressively in those other areas that I was mentioning in sports and those other areas.
You do quite well in those.
we try.
Bobsledding.
And Bob, can you imagine, even bobsledding? We try.
So just on that, you know, you mentioned the Jamaican students are coming here. Talk a little bit about student exchanges, opportunities for our students if they wanted to come and study in Jamaica, or for others, and where the opportunities are there.
Oh, so we do actually have well-established programs for student exchanges. We have boarding schools, so even some at the high school levels. And we also have very established programs at the university level. I know right now we are doing some at the Howard University. Again, we really should have checked if there's anything going on with Johns Hopkins. So we will certainly check on that in the future. But there are established programs, and we welcome those programs, and we welcome interest because it's a two-way street. We look for ways that we can get our young people exposed through these programs here, and also expose Americans and other students, foreign students, to Jamaican culture. It's one of the best ways to create global ambassadors for our countries. So we support it, and we look forward to it as an established program in Jamaica. Yes.
And no language barriers. So
no language barrier with us, yes, yes.
So at this point, I think I'd love to turn to the audience and see if we have some questions from first the audience who is physically present here, and then we'll turn to the audience out in the virtual world. So do I have any questions? Anybody here in the audience? There's a microphone, I'm quite sure, out there to be had if you would like to pose a question, and Danielle will get it to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Marks, for your remarks, and welcome to SAIS. I'm Cinnamon Dornsife. I run the Foreign Policy Institute here. And one of the things we've been looking at is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the education sector and how dramatic it has been, and the fear of the loss of a generation of school children. And I wonder if you talk to us about your experiences in Jamaica, and I'm hoping that there's good news.
I wish I could answer that with good news. The good news, I suppose, and let me just repeat the question so that we are all on board with it, is the impact of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns on our children and the education system in Jamaica. And Jamaica, like everywhere else, were, you know, adversely affected. The children are adversely affected because we had to close schools to in-person teaching. And we have tried our best to go fully virtual, but we had to overcome a situation that we just were not prepared for initially in terms of the connectivity to all parts of the country to have online school. And so we are pushing a broadband expansion. We are pushing the whole internet access for especially rural areas. And we have mounted a massive campaign for one tablet or one laptop for every child. And we have had tremendous success in that area so far. I know over 40,000 laptops were given out by the government and friends and partners of the government so far. And it's an aggressive program, and the push is to ensure that every child in Jamaica is connected and can continue to learn. Fortunately, with Pfizer coming, supplies coming to Jamaica, and Pfizer from pretty early getting approval from the FDA to give their doses to, I think it was initially 12 to 17. We were able to start the process of getting kids vaccinated, and now we are seeing where it's from 5 to 11, so just about from 5 up. So we are pushing that now to get as many children as possible vaccinated, so we can get back as quickly as possible to in-person schooling, because the other impact, which we don't speak about as much, is not just losing a year or two in terms of the physical training, some aspects of the learning and the training, but just the mental impact we are seeing globally and also in Jamaica, where it is very difficult for the children, and they do have emotional issues in dealing with just online school and the lack of socialization that children naturally want. So it's a double problem we're having, both in terms of losing a generation to the mental, emotional, psychological struggles that this period will bring, and also the impact of the learning and the training in this new environment. So we are tackling it, and we are hoping for the best, and we are putting as much resources as possible into that. But thanks for the question. It is a real area of concern that we are still trying to work through. Thank you.
Terrific. Other questions here? Please. If you don't mind introducing yourself, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Marks, for sharing with such poise and eloquence. I would like to be like a diplomat like yourself someday. I'm Yang Long. I am a student at SAIS, and I come from Singapore. I think Singapore and Jamaica, even though it's so far, we share certain similarities. We're small countries, about 200 kilometers, in size, and island states as well. And I think there's a saying that small countries are always very aware of, and I think it goes along the lines of, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. And I just wanted to hear from your personal experience as a representative of a small country in a big country like America, in the foreign policy space. How do you, find relevance? How do you ensure that your influence and your space is never overwhelmed by, the interests of bigger or medium powers? What do you do professionally, personally in the meetings, or strategically in the way you approach issues to ensure that Jamaica always has a say in the issues of the day? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that question, and pleasure to meet you. Jamaica, Singapore continues to be an inspiration for us as a small country in terms of the level of growth and development that your country has been able to achieve. We see that it's possible, and we recall that I think back in early 1970s or late 1960s, your former Prime Minister, the most outstanding and iconic Lee Kuan Yew, came to Jamaica, and so we have continued to follow their progress, and we are inspired. It's so interesting, and this goes back to one of your first questions about being a business person. One of the first things that I did, and I don't think I've ever spoken about that publicly before. One of the first things that I did when I was asked to come here as an ambassador back in 2010 was I literally sat down and wrote a little business plan, because to me this was almost like it's not a business, but it was a similar thing in terms of how can this work the best for Jamaica? What's the SWOT analysis? What are our strengths and weaknesses? What are the threats and opportunities? What do we really want to get out of it? Just like in any business, what's your product and service? What do we want to achieve, and kind of do a roadmap to get there? And part of what I realized early is that for us to find that space, where as a small country, you can be of some importance in Washington, competing for attention with 187 other diplomats, you have to find an edge. You have to find something that the United States would want to have from your country or from you. So, and you always have to seek a win-win situation, not just what you want, but how you can be of importance to this country. And that's the approach that I took from very early, that our size don't really matter if we can find areas that we represent a strategic interest. We were fortunate in that we were not starting without an asset. A very important asset was our diaspora here some of our very well-placed diaspora. So we didn't have to start from scratch. I can't claim any credit for that part, but I'll tell you, that was very useful for us, utilizing, making sure we found a methodology to connect with our diaspora, and where in the administration, for example, our diaspora members are. We were fascinated even earlier this year when we weren't sure what direction the United States would go in regarding donating vaccines. We felt that an important way to get attention was to go through our diaspora members. So we at the embassy, we spent days just trying to find all our diaspora that are elected representatives in the administration. And we had over 30 in the Northeast, over 27 in Florida. And we had Jamaican Americans that were elected in this country as representatives in the administration, 6 members in the Congress. So we had to look at everyone that we call on and say, remember us, we are in a battle, we need friends, support us. So that is one way. Know what we would call in business your low-hanging fruit. Know what are your immediate sources of support to bring attention to you. And the second thing would be where are the strategic areas of interest. And in the Western Hemisphere, there is a continuing battle in ideology. There's a continuing battle in terms of the bigger geopolitics that Dean kind of mentioned earlier with the 5G issue. So, we aren't changing times. The USA is no longer the only world power that has remained unchallenged in terms of pushing a certain way of certain relationships. And with the rise of China, with the continuing presence of Russia, which it doesn't matter which way you look at it in terms of good or bad overall, because there are pros and cons. The fact is that these countries are now making a push to developing countries and say, we prefer to be your main trading partner. We prefer to be your main partner. And this is what we are bringing to the table. And so you'll see what is happening in Africa and some countries in Latin America, where for example, the China's Belt and Road program. And this translates, because if you're very involved in a relationship and there's a major development work going on, usually if a major issue comes up, for example, in the UN or the OAS, it's very difficult sometimes for the United States or Canada or some other country to get the support of traditional allies, because those traditional allies are now expanding their relationships, and even positions that would normally look to be clearly the right thing to do in terms of democracy is now becoming a dilemma because of economic consequences for the countries that are involved. So a big part of it is showing how you can be, if necessary, a consistent ally, but and making it be clear that there can be mutual interests that will be pursued. That those things in that world, the world of geopolitics, the size of your country really don't matter. It's the friendships and common interests. So those are the two major. That's a major thing that I would say. That is the one that will get the most attention immediately. Common interest.
I think we're going to sign you up for a short course on how to be a great ambassador. And I just had to amplify that. As somebody who spent a lot of time having to deal with the 187 ambassadorial corps. There are countries that punch above their weight. And often they do is because they have extraordinarily talented ambassadors. Singapore has had a remarkable stretch of extraordinarily talented ambassadors. Not that Singapore doesn't also have a lot of strategic clout, but it has been magnified by having talented ambassadors, as we've just seen here. And I do think that senior officials appreciate that. They appreciate a realistic assessment of what countries bring to the table, but a recognition that if you've thought this through and you have a value proposition, that's something of value. And a good ambassador sees that, just the way Ambassador Marks has described, and they do punch above their weight. So there are clearly some countries that matter just because of who the countries are, but very often one should not underestimate the importance of a good ambassador. So
Thank
that was
you.
a terrific
Thank you.
exposition there of that very important point.
Thank you so much.
Let me just check to make sure there are no more questions. Oh, there are more questions here. Great. Daniel, shall I stay with the audience? I think we have time here. So let's start right here with you, and then Dean Baker will. Yeah, we still have some time, so I think we're good. So please go ahead and introduce yourself if you would.
Firstly, thank you so much. My name is Lauren Mosley. I work with Dr. Calder at the Reischauer Center. So it's been great being able to hear you speak. I listened to your Facebook Lives that you were talking about the Zoom. So I'm really grateful to hear you in person. My
So
question
I
is,
assume you're a Jamaican American?
I have Jamaican in my blood. Let's start there. I actually wanted to follow up with your conversation that you were just having. So right now I'm looking at East Asia Caribbean relations. So I was looking a lot at the Belt and Road Initiative, but my question is actually more so the US's and the G7's new Build Back Better world. And so I'm curious how that is looking in Jamaica, as well as your role in OAS. And
Sorry,
how people
can you
are
just
looking at
repeat,
it.
because I'm not hearing you very clear. You're looking at the East.
East Asia and Caribbean relations.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm curious how Jamaica is looking at the G7's Build Back Better World initiative,
Yes.
and also how that affects the regional aspect with your role in OAS.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure. Well, I want to just recognize that we appreciate your interest in following what is happening with our broadcast, and speaking about that Jamaica in your blood. We welcome you, and let us know at the embassy how we can make that translate into something official. In the Caribbean, we have a couple countries that are more aligned have made an alliance with Taiwan, and then you have others who are recognize China's one policy. So there's not a uniform Caribbean position towards East Asia and China in particular. Some countries have engaged with China on the Belt and Road program. Jamaica is one of them. We have done some major infrastructure work with Chinese government, mostly through loan arrangements. We have been careful in terms of the types of projects that we're involved in, because we're always aware of the general geopolitics and the areas in which the US will have a strategic interest. So we try to balance both sides. So I know quite a few other countries in the Caribbean have also engaged with Taiwan or with China. So that's an ongoing situation. There's no consensus or in terms of each country has a sovereign right to decide where they'd want to put their relationships. We are very excited about the global Build Back Better program. We although it has been pushed through the form of the G7, we see it as a global program that can benefit all of us, because it is I read recently Peter Blair Henry wrote an interesting article. Professor Peter Blair Henry at NYU, former Dean at Stern, Jamaican American, wrote a very interesting article on the way infrastructure development can transform emerging economies. And what I like about the Build Back Better is that there's a focus on really strengthening the infrastructure of countries. And I believe, and we're actually pleased to see the first bill that was passed here in the US, the infrastructure bill, because we believe that if there can be a focus by the international financial institutions, the World Bank, IDB, on programs that are long-lasting and will have a transformative impact on development in countries such as infrastructure programs. If it's a policy-driven initiative and push the financing in that direction, it will have a tremendous impact on countries being able to recover much quicker. Because I'm sure here in the US, you go back to, is it in the 1920s or when you start your major intra-country war, 1950s,
Part
yeah.
of the Cold War. It was
That's
the
right.
National
Yeah.
Defense
Yeah,
Highway Act.
yes, and in fact, if we go back earlier, there's a book called The Americana, which spoke about just the difference the railway made
The
by
railway.
linking the north and from the west to from New York to
Canals
California,
before
and
that, in
canals
my
before that.
part of the world.
So the building an infrastructure where we can reach to each corner in a country quickly and efficiently will transform the growth scenario of these countries. And in fact, it has even a bigger socioeconomic impact, because we see, for example, that migration is a major problem all over the world. And apart from political instability, the next thing is economic opportunities. So if you can do big projects and programs that change the opportunities for the ordinary residents in countries to find a way to be engaged in the economy of the country, you'll have far less of this sort of economic migration. So I believe it's a very important program, and I'm looking forward. We are invested in seeing how it will play out. And the angle that I see from small countries like Jamaica is that we will put a push on whatever openings it will allow. We'll push with the international financial institutions for more affordable financing for countries to take on these big projects. That's where I'm.
Terrific question. Thank you. Sorry.
Ambassador Marks, thank you so much for being here again. Corey Baker, I serve as Assistant Dean for Student Affairs here at SAIS. We pride ourselves on preparing our students to be future leaders, future diplomats. And so I would just ask on their behalf, what advice would you give for somebody or for a student who's going to be some of our future diplomats? So maybe a top 5 list of what students might need to be looking at if they were to follow in your footsteps.
Sure. I thought you were going to ask me where you can get a nice Jamaican meal at the nearest restaurant. Yes, so I believe I did not come up the traditional route. We have here Ms. Taylor, who is a Foreign Service officer, and her route is where you would, the first thing is if you could get some exposure in your academic training to the field of international relations, it gives you a head start in that career. And secondly, to seek employment, initial employment related to that field, whether it's in your State Department or ministries of foreign affairs around the world, or the international financial institutions that deals with global issues. So the initial career path will also be helpful in terms of determining a career in diplomacy. The third thing I would say is to really have an interest, a passion for global affairs, because it's very easy in all of our countries for us to get very caught up with what's happening here and just be here and thinking your country is the world. So that to have a broader perspective and appreciation of the world out there is important. And if you can have a passion for that knowledge, I think that would also be a great asset if you're pursuing this field. I think the fourth thing I would say is to whatever you're doing or whatever stage you're at, to really do your best to show an attitude of being successful, because you might not start at the career level of a foreign service officer, but if you have a track record of being successful or being someone who was an achiever or will get things done, these are things that will be important for a job, I believe, any job, but also very important as a diplomat, because you must show that you can perform. And the third thing that I would say, because that relates to me, is that if you're not going to be a career officer, well, not the third, the fifth thing, you said 5 things. The fifth thing is that if you have any interest at all in participating in leadership or high representation of your country, it's very important to be involved in the political affairs of your country. And so I was not a political person, but I was very involved in the political affairs of the country. So after a while, as a business person, I felt that I had to make time, for example, to serve on public boards, to be involved in matters that affect the policy direction of the country, because it's very easy for you to stay in your lane, but you then become subject to the decisions all around you, and it is actually more useful to make a little time, to give a bit of your time, to have influence on the things that you will eventually affect you. Because I know I talk to many persons and I say, I don't have time for public service. I don't have time to serve. What is important is actually enlighten the self-interest to make that time, because those policies will eventually affect you. So I believe very importantly to make the time to have a wider interest and find ways to serve publicly, to be prepared to give back and be involved as part of your planning to be a leader and a leader in diplomacy field. Yeah.
I hope somebody's written those 5 things down. I think we should write them down on index cards and hand them out to all of our students. That's great. Danielle, should we turn to questions from the virtual world?
Sure. So we have a few questions from our online viewers. One of them is from Rosanna Resende. She says, Ambassador, given the challenges you've outlined, the pandemic and climate resilience, and opportunities you highlighted, such as digitalizing the economy, can you speak to measures Jamaica is undertaking to ensure gender equity as these structural issues are tackled?
Sure. Well, you know, when I became the president of the American Chamber of Commerce, I was the first female president. But one thing I did ensure is that the president after me was also a woman, because I really believe that our job is not about being satisfied to be the first, but really to ensure that we move for gender equity and equality in as many ways as we can. Jamaica is one of the few countries in the world that I believe we have more, if not more, just about equal ratio in terms of professional managers, men and women. As a policy initiative, the government actually is pushing for 50-50 gender equity across the board in our public life. So for example, the Prime Minister really pushed to select candidates for government positions, government representatives to contest in the last election. And so for the first time, I think Jamaica is now up to 30%, is it 30%? Of our elected representatives being female. So there is it's now a consistent push. We have now passed a new legislation looking at the gender rights and sexual harassment and many of these other issues that are topical today. Jamaica has moved forward to put those things in law. And I know sometimes the question is asked about the glass ceiling and women doing better in the workplace. And I always want for us all to remember a little dose of reality, that women clearly have the ability to serve in whatever capacity that is given in the corporate world or in government or in any field. But many women choose to, because many times it comes to a choice between your family, your children, and the top job. And we must not underestimate the time and sacrifice it takes to get to shatter that glass ceiling, to be a CEO, and the impact on, especially if you have children. So as some says, it's important not to just look at the numbers alone to say, oh, Jamaica is a country, the world is only having 20% women as CEOs, because sometimes we have to make that choice. And given that choice, I believe the most important thing for me as a mother is to make sure that I give time to my children. So we also have to bear that in mind. But our policies in Jamaica for sure is to push for gender equality. And we support international policy positions in the international fora that also encourage that around the world, because we do know that there are some countries where that is still a wish list for women to be able to participate equally in their society. And we try to be very involved in that in the international institutions, diplomatic institutions, to push for more awareness that women all over the world should have equal rights.
Great. So we have another question from Christopher Woody. He says, Ambassador, you mentioned Jamaica's focus on economic diplomacy. Can you talk about what growing competition between the US and China means for that diplomatic effort?
Sure. It's really, competition is always good. And I'm talking as a business person primarily, first, because competition drives us to do better and be better. And in order to attract the customer or the relationship that we are seeking. So I believe the competition between the US and China for relationships, sovereign relationships in the world is a healthy thing. And it's a clear choice that countries will have to make in terms of what is being offered and what kind of strings are attached. Are there no strings attached? So it's what is the clear position of your country in terms of how you engage with international partners on major projects. And so this will force countries, especially democracies, to make decisions that are good for their country, and that they have a choice to make that decision that are good for their country, and one that is transparent and is able to be seen and accepted by all their people. So it is overall, it's a good thing, and I hope to see other major world powers rising and becoming part of the competition. Yeah.
Great. And we have another question from Nikki Duncan. She says, given Barbados' recent transition to a republic, has Jamaica considered a similar route?
That has been a consideration for some time for Jamaica. We know we have it is being looked at, but especially at this time, it's not a top priority just because of the amount of other critical issues that are on the table. As I mentioned earlier, Jamaica is in the midst of our geography is such that we have a wonderful location, being a transshipment port point between Latin America and the United States, North and South America. But right now, we have many problems from that geographic location, where we are also used as a transshipment point for drugs and guns, guns coming from North America, drugs from Latin America, and this has impacted our society. And so we have to put a focus on. Our big focus right now is on education, health, the security of our country, and big growth initiatives to keep our people employed. That is important in terms of ultimately who is regarded as our head of state, but at this point it's not on the priority of our focus.
Understood. And just one last question, another one from Nikki. How does the diaspora get involved with you all? So who do they need to contact to get in touch and to be engaged?
And I have him right here. Please stand up.
Oh,
Emil,
okay, great.
this is Emil Wallace. Emil Wallen Wallace is our community relations officer. And he is the person who is focused on diaspora engagement at the embassy. But my entire team, please stand up. Douglas Chen Young is also very involved in outreach efforts. He has been our social media expert, and our trade minister council, Alicia Taylor, is also very involved. So we put a lot of emphasis on our diaspora. Ms. Taylor, for example, she will work with diaspora to ensure that if they have any project going on in Jamaica, in any field, that she connect with the Jamaican entities to ensure there's smooth communication both sides. So she's a major facilitator, and Emily here is a major communicator to the diaspora. So that's the team that is here, and I asked them to come specifically to ensure that if there are any diaspora members listening in, we are ready and able to connect and to start a dialogue and a relationship.
That's a great note to end on. I'm glad we got that in. So you could make the pitch, and thank you all for doing this. Ambassador, you've been very generous with your time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I do think you really have demonstrated how important a well-informed, thoughtful, imaginative, dynamic, and entrepreneurial ambassador can be. Your country is very well served, and we're very fortunate here in the United States to have you as Jamaica's representative here in the United States. We hope to see more of you, hope to get you in the classroom so you can share some of these insights with our students going forward. But for that, let me just thank the audience, both here and out there in the ether, and look forward to our next meeting in this series. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure.